Welcome back to the Observable Unknown. Before you ever made a promise, someone had already made one for you. Before you chose a family, a country, a language, or a history, you'd already been placed inside all four. You arrived in a world where favors had been exchanged, sacrifices had been made, wounds had been remembered, and certain names were spoken with gratitude while others were spoken through clenched teeth. Then one day, somebody told you what you owed. Maybe they said it plainly, after everything we've done for you. Maybe nobody said it at all. You simply felt it whenever you considered leaving, refusing, changing your life, or becoming someone the people before you hadn't imagined. We like to believe responsibility begins with consent. I agreed, so I'm responsible. I promised, so I'm bound. I chose, so I must answer for the consequences. That's an important moral principle. It just isn't the whole of moral life, because not every responsibility originates with choice. The French sociologist and anthropologist Marcel Mauss explored this problem through The Gift. In The Gift, published in 1925, Mauss examined societies in which giving wasn't simply private generosity. A gift created a relationship, and the relationship carried obligations. There was an obligation to give, an obligation to receive, and eventually an obligation to return. The gift moved, but it didn't disappear. It remained active between people. A gift could become a bond. It could also become a debt. We still live inside that logic, even when we pretend we don't. A parent pays for a child's education and says no repayment is expected, but years later the child may feel unable to move away. A friend helps during a crisis, and from that moment onward, disagreement begins to feel like disloyalty. A family member gives money, access, shelter, or opportunity, then quietly acquires the right to comment on every decision that follows. Sometimes the obligation is loving, sometimes it becomes a leash, and often it's both. That's what makes inherited obligation so difficult to judge. The debt may be real, the claim made in its name may not be. Alasdair MacIntyre approaches obligation from another direction. He argues that none of us begins as an isolated individual, inventing a moral life from nothing. We enter stories already in progress. We are born into families, communities, traditions, professions, and histories that existed before us. We inherit benefits we didn't earn, injuries we didn't cause, and responsibilities we never formally accepted. You may inherit the privileges created by someone else's labor. You may also inherit the consequences of what they refused to face. You may receive a family name that opens doors, or one that places a burden on your back before anyone has met you. MacIntyre's insight is uncomfortable because it unsettles the modern fantasy of the self-made person. No one is self-made. Someone kept you alive before you could return the favor. Someone taught you words you did not invent. Someone built the roads, institutions, rituals, and systems through which your choices became possible. Even rebellion depends upon an inherited language in which to say no. That doesn't mean every inherited demand is legitimate. It means freedom begins inside conditions we didn't choose. And that's very different from saying choice doesn't matter. Choice matters because inheritance isn't destiny. But choice never begins from nowhere. This is part of what I teach through the relational topology of consciousness. The self isn't a sealed unit that later enters relationships. The self emerges through them. We are formed by who protected us, who frightened us, who named us, who expected something from us, and who made survival possible. So obligation isn't merely an idea imposed upon an already finished person. It can become part of the structure from which the person thinks. A daughter may believe she's freely choosing to care for everyone, but beneath that choice may be an old family arrangement in which love was granted to the person who caused the least trouble. A son may insist he wants to preserve the family business, yet beneath that desire may be a terror that leaving would make his father's sacrifices meaningless. A survivor may devote an entire life to succeeding because failure would feel like betraying the dead. These aren't false motives, they're relational motives. They belong to a story larger than the individual carrying them. The question isn't only what do I I want. It's also, whose unfinished account am I trying to settle? Obligation can preserve civilization. It teaches us to care for children, protect the vulnerable, honor promises, maintain knowledge, and return something to the communities that sustained us. A world without obligation would not be a free one. It would be abandoned. But obligation becomes dangerous when gratitude is used to abolish choice, when sacrifice becomes a permanent invoice, when the dead are granted endless authority over the living, when one generation says, "We suffered, so you must repeat the form of life that made our suffering bearable." There's a difference between honoring a sacrifice and becoming its monument. There's a difference between receiving a gift and surrendering the rest of your life to the giver. There's a difference between responsibility and captivity. So how do we decide what we truly owe? We begin by separating the gift from the demand attached to it. What was freely given? What was given with an expectation nobody admitted? What did you genuinely receive? What price are you now being asked to pay? Then ask whether repayment would preserve the relationship or merely preserve someone else's control. A legitimate obligation leaves room for the other person to remain a person. An illegitimate one turns them into a function. The good child, the loyal sibling, the grateful immigrant, the inheritor who never changes anything, the survivor who must remain strong, the family peacemaker who isn't allowed to have a conflict of their own. In my system of narrative architecture, plot is what happens. Story is how what happens changes relationships. Obligation is often the mechanism that keeps those changes alive. Someone rescued you, now you're the indebted one. Someone sacrificed, now you're the inheritor. Someone was harmed, now you're appointed custodian of the wound. The event may be over, but the roles continue, and once a role becomes moralized, leaving it can feel like becoming a bad person. That's why the end of an obligation often produces guilt before it produces freedom. Guilt doesn't always mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you've stopped performing the role that kept a relationship stable. Different states make different decisions. A guilty state may interpret separation as cruelty. A frightened state may call submission loyalty. A resentful state may reject every responsibility simply because one responsibility became unbearable. So don't decide from the loudest feeling alone. Ask what the obligation protects. Ask whom it serves. Ask whether it can be carried without destroying the person carrying it. Maturity isn't the refusal of all inherited debt. It's the ability to discriminate among debts. Some deserve repayment. Some deserve gratitude without obedience. Some require repair. Some belong to people who are no longer alive, but whose unfinished work has entered our hands. And some were never ours at all. You may owe your family care. You may not owe them your disappearance. You may owe your ancestors remembrance. You may not owe them repetition. You may owe your community participation. You may not owe it silence. The question at the center of this arc remains, what am I carrying and what is carrying me? Obligation asks us to look closely at both halves, because what we carry can give a life meaning, but when we no longer know why we're carrying it, meaning can quietly become bondage. Not every responsibility begins with choice, but every inherited responsibility eventually encounters one. Will I continue it? Will I revise it? Will I return the gift in another form? Or will I finally admit that this debt has already taken enough? If this interlude made you reconsider the difference between gratitude and captivity, make that known. Leave a rating or a review, not for recognition, for signal, so the gifts of the past may be carried forward without turning the future into repayment. Until next time, remember, you don't become what you feel, you become what you return to, and what you return to returns as you.